All right, welcome to the Carl Jackson Show, your daily dose of objective truth in a world of confusion and lies. Guys, today I'm going to do what I'm calling our big interview. As a matter of fact, I think I'm going to change the title of these shows to the big interview, because I am so honored to have this guest with me. I've listened to him for years, although he does not know me, especially when I was there was a period of time where I would walk my dogs forever in the morning and in the evening. I would listen to a lot of his material, a lot of his sermons. So, Pastor Erwin Lutzer, it's such an honor and a pleasure to have you on.
I'm so glad to be with you, Carl, and thank you for your ministry. And I hope that people who are listening will call their friends and invite them to listen, because we're going to be talking about some very important issues. Not only that, but we're also going to be giving people hope. After all, we are a people of hope.
Man, you know what, Pastor? I got to tell you what, I'm so glad to hear that, and I'll tell you why. We're going to be going through your book. You wrote a book a few years back called "We Will Not Be Silenced," and I encourage every Christian. To read it. Now, I've been involved in the political realm for quite some time. I mean, when God saved me, he immediately cleaned me up and gave me a love for politics, which I didn't even care about. So I knew that it was something that God had birthed inside of my heart. And right away, I started saying, this was back in 2000 or 99, actually, 1999. And I started listening to people like the ACLJ, so on, et cetera. And I was like, wow, I didn't understand that Christians were so persecuted in the United States. However, whenever I listened to Christians, I would hardly, if ever, hear anything about it. And I got really involved in the political realm and understanding that, listen, politics isn't the church, but the left was using politics, in my opinion, to go after the church. So I got to be honest with you, Pastor. I've been disappointed for quite some time. I go to a Bible preaching and believing church, and I would hear this stuff, but I wouldn't hear much of it in the culture. And then, thank God, I would hear people like yourself, John MacArthur, R.C. Sproul, other pastors, Dr. David Jeremiah, and some of the pastors out there. My own pastor, or former pastor now, Carl Stevens, and now Johnny Wilson. And I would hear this stuff, but still not a lot of it in the culture. I got a hold of your book, We Will Not Be Silenced. And I got to tell you, I was so encouraged, but so discouraged, just because I don't understand, Pastor, and perhaps you can help me to understand this, why it is that the church, by and large, in my opinion, and maybe I'm wrong, doesn't understand the impact that the culture is having on the church.
Well, you know, speaking as somebody who was a pastor for many years, I was senior pastor of Moody Church for 36 years. Carl, you must understand that pastors do want to walk a very tight line. On the one hand, they don't want to put up unnecessary stumbling blocks to the gospel. On the other hand, of course, they are tempted to simply be silent about the controlling realities of the culture. Now, my view is this: I've never endorsed a political candidate or a political party, but think of all the issues that I have dealt with, that other pastors also have dealt with, which are deemed political today. For example, the responsibility of parents in raising their children. That's a biblical issue, but it's also political. As a matter of fact, in the book that we're talking about, We Will Not Be Silenced, I have a whole chapter on the sexualization of children and how parents must stand against it. Let's take the issue of sexuality and the whole trans movement. I believe that churches have to help their parishioners navigate these difficult questions. And so once again, we have to speak to these issues, and we have to understand that they are moral, they are biblical, but they are also impinge upon politics. So I believe that there is a way. I've always believed as a pastor that it's my responsibility to speak about these controlling streams of culture, but to do so always redemptively, remembering that the cross is above the flag, remembering that we need ultimately to lead people to Christ. But This is so critical. I've written a book about Hitler entitled Hitler's Cross. I don't know if you've ever read that, Carl, but here's the point. The question is, should the church only teach the Bible? And of course, we believe that they should only teach the Bible, but should they stay away from those biblical issues which impinge upon the culture? And there were many people who wouldn't speak against Nazi Germany, for example, because they didn't want to get involved in politics. But people like Niemöller who did, they, of course, were brought to court for abuse of pulpit. There was a muzzle decree. We call it hate speech today. So to maintain that balance, we want to always lead redemptively, to be sure, but we're living in a culture that cannot be ignored. And one of the points that I make is this. It's very important for us to recognize that we did not ask for this culture war. The culture war has come to us. And the book that we're talking about, We'll Not Be Silenced, I didn't write it so much to reclaim the culture as I wrote it to reclaim the church.
I love that.
And the church's responsibility in the midst of culture.
All right, well, let's do this, Pastor, if you don't mind. We only have about 4 minutes left in this first block, and I want to get started, if you will. I want to go through some of these chapters because I believe that there are Christians. Actually, I know that there are Christians out there that have not made connected the dots when it comes to issues like cultural Marxism, its impact on the church. I've said for quite some time. Especially, I was very disappointed in the reaction, by and large, of the evangelical church during the COVID lockdowns, the BLM riots of 2020, where I said that the BLM riots or BLM had a larger impact on the Black Christian church, in my opinion, than Black evangelical churches did. And I say that somewhat sarcastically, but I'm not sure that I'm quite wrong, Pastor. But let's start here. How did we get here? How we got here? That's chapter 1 in his book. And I encourage God's to honest truth. I'm not trying to hawk books or sell books, but I believe that if you call yourself a Christian, I think it is incumbent upon you to understand the times that you are living in. And I think this book lays it out so well. And it was written a few years ago, but it is so relevant given the issues and what we're dealing with today. But how did we get here, or how we got here? The radical left, Pastor, as you said, don't believe that America can be fixed. And you had mentioned that Karl Marx rules from the grave. We have about 2.5 minutes left in this block. Touch on that, if you would.
Well, Karl Marx looked around and he saw oppression, and there was oppression. Of course, the workers were being oppressed, and so he looked at that, and his answer became a curse to much of the world. 1/4 of the world at one time was thoroughly Marxist. But cultural Marxism says we don't need a revolution like they had in China and in Russia. We can bring it in incrementally. But what we have to do is to capture the media, we have to capture government, we have to capture education, most importantly. And in this way, we can bring about Marxism, and people will look at it and they will like it. And so what we have today are these cultural streams. Even in the next segment, Carl, we can talk about racism. We can talk about Saul Alinsky. As you know, I refer to him there in my book. And the reason is because he saw race as an opportunity not to be unified, not to solve problems. He shouted at people who wanted to solve problems. He said, "We are not here to solve problems. We are here, rather, for revolution. We are here to use problems to bring about a Marxist vision of the United States." So what my book does, and since you referenced it, I want to simply say this. Dave Jeremiah wrote the intro, and he said the difference between this book, if I might say this about my own, is that this book shows the unity of the cultural Marxism and the radical left in America and how it permeates all aspects of society.
Man, and he is absolutely right. Again, I'm speaking to my guest, Erwin Lutzer. We will not be silenced. 30 seconds here before the break. Maybe you can just touch on it before we go out here, Pastor. The nuclear family, Karl Marx didn't like it. Let's get started on that.
Yeah. The reason is because it was a unit of oppression. Men oppressed their wives, parents oppressed their children. They took them to church. God was the ultimate oppressor. So his view is do away with oppression and people will change because people are a reflection of their environment. And everybody will live happily without laws and will all be at peace. What a view of human nature, totally contradicted by the scriptures.
All right, we'll be back with more. Carl Jackson, I'm interviewing Erwin Lutzer. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. Just real quickly, I want to talk to you about one of our sponsors, Wealth Protection Research. At the very heart of our democracy lies a principle we hold sacred, free speech. It's the cornerstone that supports every freedom that we cherish. Yet in today's digital age, discussions about our wealth, our rights, and our future are being silenced or overshadowed in mainstream narratives, leaving many feeling voiceless in conversations crucial to our financial independence and security. This is where Wealth Protection Research steps in, armed with a mission that's never been more critical. Wealth Protection Research is not a financial advisory firm. They are defenders of free speech, committed to giving a voice to the silenced. Wealth Protection Research tirelessly seeks out financial experts. These are the voices that challenge prevailing narratives, especially as we navigate the uncertainties of the 2024 election. Wealth Protection Research has created a 2024 election wealth protection report, quote unquote. This free report highlights the 3 best ideas for protecting and growing your money heading into the 2024 election. It contains ideas the mainstream media won't touch, and listeners can get it completely free. All you have to do is text the word IDEAS, IDEAS, to 76626 to claim your free copy. Again, if you believe in the sanctity of free speech and the importance of financial freedom, then act now. Text IDEAS, IDEAS, to 76626 to claim your free copy of this 2024 election protection report. It's time to widen the scope of what we're told, to hear the ideas the establishment does not think you can handle, and to take control of our financial destinies. Text IDEAS, IDEAS, to 76626 to claim your free copy. All right, now back to my guest, Pastor Erwin Lutzer, or now, I guess, retired pastor Erwin Lutzer of the Moody Church. Is that correct, Pastor?
Well, I'm known as Pastor Emeritus, but I have to say that I'm far from retired. I have a very involved speaking schedule. I continue to write books. As a matter of fact, we're talking about We Will Not Be Silenced, but there's another book I've written entitled No Reason to Hide. And this fall, I have a new book coming out entitled The Eclipse of God. Now, in addition to this, our media, through Running to Win, continues to grow. We're in 50 different countries in 7 different languages, so I'm very busy. So all that to say this, I want to go back to the ad that you just gave. You talked about free speech. In my book, We Will Not Be Silenced, I have a chapter on that. And I don't know if that's where you want to begin, but I want to say this while it's fresh in my mind. There I quote Marxists, even in America, who say explicitly that we should not have free speech. And the argument is that if you have free speech, the capitalists always win the argument. So I quote one writer who says, we definitely need 2 different views. As a matter of fact, he says, we have 2 different, I'm not thinking of the word that he used, but the idea is we definitely cannot allow free speech because it is a power. And if we allow it, we'll continue on. Capitalism will win the argument. And what we must do is to shut that down. We must cancel it for the good of society. So the issue of free speech is absolutely incredibly important.
Yeah, it absolutely is, Pastor. And he's speaking of, excuse me, chapter 4 in his book, Freedom of Speech for Me, but not for me, not for thee is the title of the chapter. And he does talk about the value of free speech and how people like Herbert Marcuse wanted to ban free speech. He attributed all evils of society to capitalism, Pastor, of all things. Your
Yeah,
thoughts
and
on that?
we must understand this, that freedom of speech is something that is very precious. Of course, it can be misused, but I also want to point something else out. This is very critical. There are people who are listening right now, Carl, and they are parents and they have children in universities. And these universities have speech codes. Now, I quote some of them, especially in my more recent book, but I quote some of them saying things like this: don't use the word fresh man, because after all, men are toxic, etc. One of them says, if there's a barber shop in your area, don't say that he takes in walk-ins, because if you say that, you might offend people who can't walk. After all, there are people in wheelchairs. Now, every parent, everyone listening, needs to take a deep breath and ask themselves this question: what is going on? And you must understand that the purpose of these codes is not to elevate the debate. The purpose is to silence the debate, because you don't know what's proper and what isn't. I mean, you have no idea, and so students self-censor themselves. Nobody knows what's proper. Carl, can we still go into a restaurant and ask for a menu? Can women still have a manicure? Nobody knows. And so what you find is there are different ways to shut down speech. One way is to ban speech. The other way is to have these speech codes that narrows the focus of people's thought in such a way that eventually they will not even be able to argue against anything because they won't have the vocabulary for it. In the book that we're talking about, namely, We Will Not Be Silenced, I also have a chapter on propaganda, which has always been an interest of mine ever since I studied Hitler. So there are various streams that come together that want to limit free speech, that want to control free speech. And of course, all of us know it here in America as the cancel culture. And nobody knew the value of free speech more than Solomon Rushdie. You remember, he's the one who wrote a book that was heavily criticized by the Islamic community. And he was on a fatwa, that is, they wanted to get his life. And he says, if you cannot say something because it offends somebody else, don't say that you believe in free speech. Free speech by necessity means that we can say some things that might be offensive to others. And if you don't believe that, you really don't believe in free speech. He was very clear about it, and I quote him in the book.
I got to tell you, Pastor, we have 3 minutes left in this block. One of my favorite chapters in the book, and we are talking about, and you heard Pastor Emeritus of Moody Church, Erwin Lutzer. That is my guest. And guys, listen, I mean, you can go back and listen to his sermons. I mean, they will absolutely bless you. I encourage you to do so. But right now, the reason why that I have him on the program is because we are talking about a book called We Will Not Be Silenced, that he wrote a few years back, and it is very relevant today for the culture, for the church, and I think it's very important for Christians that may be. I'm not sure if I'm using the right word, but it maybe just all of a sudden you see this onslaught of this, what's basically a cultural revolution by the left, and you kind of been guarded, and you're like, wow, where does all this craziness come from? Men can be women, women can be men, racism, which, I mean, frankly, it felt like we were pretty much over in the United States. All of a sudden, it's rearing its ugly head again. Where's all this coming from? This chapter 2, is one of my favorites in the book, breaking down things, and that is called Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. I believe I got that right. I'm double checking through the book, but you can go out and get the book. I encourage you to go out and get the book. Every Christian pastor should read this book, in my opinion. But you talk about why it's crucial for the left to destroy the past. We have just short of a minute and a half left in this block, Pastor. Will you talk to the audience about that?
Well, very quickly, I quote Schlesinger, a historian who said that the past is to a nation as memory is to a person.
That is,
you know what happens to a person who loses his memory? He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know his history. He doesn't know his identity. So if we can look back and vilify all of the founding fathers and vilify the Constitution and show how evil it is, if we can destroy the past, we can therefore build a Marxist future. So that's what a lot of the left is doing. It wants to vilify. Of course, there are evils in America. You know, we talk about slavery and all that, but anything that is good is not allowed, because what you want to do is to destroy and rebuild on a Marxist foundation, which is like building a house on the sand. And this house is a house of cards held together by ropes of mist.
I got to tell you, when I read that the quote that you mentioned, how history is to a nation what memory is to an individual, that hit me so hard. It was just absolutely brilliant. Anyway, we'll be back with more. I'm speaking to Pastor Erwin Lutzer. Go out and get the book, We Will Not Be Silenced. Back in a few. All right, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. I'm joined by my guest, Erwin Lutzer, Pastor Erwin Lutzer. Go out and get his book, We Will Not Be Silenced. He is still a prolific writer and speaker. He's got a couple of books that are coming out, but I want to pay attention to this book, We Will Not Be Silenced. I think it's very important for the evangelical church to understand the times that we're living in, so that you can be prepared and so that you can also have hope. I think this book does it very well. We Will Not Be Silenced by Erwin W. Lutzer. Please go out and get it. Guys, real quick, let me talk to you about MyPillow. You might have heard Mike Lindell and MyPillow no longer have the support of their box stores or shopping channels the way that they used to. They've been part of this cancel culture, so they want to pass the savings directly on to you by having a $25 extravaganza. When Mike started MyPillow, it was just a one product company. With the help of his dedicated employees, they now have hundreds of products. Some you may not even know about. Guys, I have so many products in my house. It's insane. To get the word out, I want to invite my listeners to check out their $25 extravaganza. A 2-pack multi-use MyPillows are just $25. The MyPillow sandals are $25. Their 6-pack of towel sets are $25. You get a brand new 4-pack of dish towels. You guessed it, just $25. For the first time ever, the premium MyPillows with all the new Giza fabric are just $25. Orders over $75 will receive free shipping as well. All you have to do to get this offer is go to mypillow.com and use the promo code Carl, C-A-R-L. I don't spell it like the communist Karl Marx, all right? So I spell it C-A-R-L, or give them a call at 800-858-0263. Again, 800-858-0263. Use the promo code Carl, not spelled like Karl Marx, but C-A-R-L. All right, let's get right back to Pastor Erwin Lutzer and his book, We Will Not Be Silenced. And we were talking about chapter 2, how the left wants to rewrite the past to control the future. And this quote that stood out to me, I mean, it just hit me in the gut. You heard Pastor mention it right before we went to the break. But history is to a nation what memory is to an individual. And Pastor, you mentioned how the left obviously they don't want us to compare, or they want to berate American history, but they don't want us to compare America to other countries around the globe, because America comparatively looks pretty good.
Exactly. Saul Alinsky here in Chicago emphasized that. Saul Alinsky, of course, was a Marxist, and he saw the opportunity. You know, Karl Marx emphasized that there was a great deal of oppression between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And the proletariat were the working people, the bourgeoisie were the landowners. So he wanted to remove the oppression. Of course, the way you did that is a revolution, take away everything, give it to the state. We know where that went. What happened is Saul Alinsky saw this opportunity could be applied to race. So rather than helping the under-resourced communities of Chicago, he worked against that. I met a man who worked with Saul Alinsky, and he said that we had many good ideas as to how to help the under-resourced communities. And Saul Alinsky, he said, no, let's not do that, because he says, what we have to do is not help people. We have to use these differences. And so the whole idea of oppression and so forth. Now, has there been oppression of the African American community? Yes. But what's the answer? The answer is not to continually shout across a chasm, blaming, shaming. The answer biblically, and people have to understand this, the biblical answer is Colossians chapter 3, in about the first 4 or 5 verses. He says this, in Christ, there's neither Jew nor Greek, bond or free, Scythian, they were marauders who were running throughout the country, barbarian, bond or free, but Christ is all and in all. So, biblically, the answer is this. Jews don't become Greeks. Greeks don't become Jews. Barbarians don't become Scythians. But there is a transcendent unity in Christ. So, I remember the days, in the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s when we worked toward racial reconciliation, where we met together at the foot of the cross, received forgiveness, and then talked to each other and said, how can we help? How can we bring justice where there is injustice, and so forth? Critical race theory comes along and blows all that apart. Critical race theory says it's time for a blame and shame game. And it's like one African American said to me, and I think I quoted in the book, where he said that there can be no reconciliation because he says, unless whites meet a certain standard, and because that standard is impossible,
yes,
there can never be reconciliation. And that, of course, is exactly the Marxist position, is that there cannot be reconciliation. So to put it very clearly for your listeners, Carl, critical race theory tears apart everything that Jesus died to bring together. It has not made race relations better. It has exacerbated it. And of course, we've left behind the words of Martin Luther King that we should judge one another not by the color of our skin, but the content of our character. Critical race theory says, no, we should judge one another by the color of our skin. And that's why there's so much racial tension. One of the reasons there's so much racial tension in the United States today.
Yeah, Pastor, I think you're absolutely right, and I would just say, I mean, because I listen, I'm in the political realm. It's what I deal with there every single day. But I mean, you mentioned it. I mean, with Saul Alinsky and the gentleman that you said worked with him, the left had no intention of healing racial or for racial reconciliation. I would even argue, and this is just me, this is my opinion, that it is the left that frankly, are within the Democrat Party. And I understand you don't go partisan, Pastor. So this is just me strictly speaking here for those in the listening audience. It is the left that has kept the black community oppressed because it is to their benefit politically to keep the black community oppressed and minority groups oppressed and mad, quite frankly. And so that's why the Bible is so crucial in understanding these things. Also, the left, you mentioned the Constitution. The Constitution kind of gets in the way of the revolution that the left seeks. We have about 2.5 minutes left in this blog. Pastor, your take on that?
Yeah, of course, the Constitution. This is the remarkable thing about America. Now, I don't know if you know this, Carl, but I was born and raised in Canada, so I'm a naturalized American citizen. And the more I learn about the separation of powers and how America was founded, what America has been able to do is to balance order, we have laws, along with freedom. And what you find today is that there are those who want to destroy the Constitution to rebuild America in an entirely different direction. And speaking about people like Saul Alinsky, remember this: chaos is essentially very important to revolution. So what you want to do is to foment the chaos, you want to foment the differences, and then you want to use those differences. But we as Christians have to step into this debate and say this: we have an answer. At Moody Church, where I served, on any Sunday, we had 70 different countries of origin represented, and we rejoiced in that because the Bible says that in heaven there are going to be people from every tongue and every nation. And of course, we know that there will be people there from every color. And so what we want to do is be committed to say, how can we work together? As I've already emphasized, critical race theory wants to tear that apart and say that we cannot work together because you have this blaming and you have the shaming which goes on. And that's exactly where we are culturally. So the bottom line is we as Christians need to hold high the unity of the gospel, the unity of our churches. And what we have to do is to say, even those with whom we differ, there is a transcendent unity in Christ.
Again, I'm speaking to Pastor Erwin W. Lutzer, Pastor Emeritus of the Moody Church, and we are discussing his book, We Will Not Be Silenced. He still is a extremely busy man, still writing and speaking and traveling, but we are honored to have him with us here today. I'm encouraging he's going to stay with us for one last final block after the break, but I want to encourage every believer to go out and get this book, We Will Not Be Silenced. If you want to understand what's going on in the culture and how the church can have an impact and what the church should expect, quite frankly, We Will Not Be Silenced by Pastor Erwin W. Lutzer. We'll be back with our final segment after this quick break. All right, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. And I'm joined by my guest, Erwin Lutzer, again, a pastor emeritus of the Moody Bible Church. Also, I'm encouraging everyone listening and watching this broadcast to go out and get his book. He actually wrote it a few years ago, but it is so relevant and is unbelievable, especially if you're a Christian that's trying to understand how the culture has just sunk into the abyss so rapidly. Go out and get the book, We Will Not Be Silenced, by Erwin W. Lutzer. And again, I am back with Pastor Lutzer. And Pastor, you have a chapter in the book, chapter 5, and it talks about the sexualization of the children. And we see that happening today in America. I mean, it's unbelievable how people seem to be capitulating to this, seem to be scared to talk about it even. But you have adults that are sexualizing children, I mean, in K through 12 now, and even encouraging children to chop body parts off and telling them that they can be something else biologically, which is impossible. what is it about sexualizing the children that the left sees as a tool to be able to transform America?
Okay.
Well, I don't want to sensationalize this debate except to say that let's be reminded of the words of Hitler, who said, "He who controls the youth controls the future." That's why Karl Marx, and we blame a lot of things on him, rightly so. Karl Marx emphasized